So how does a huge, complex disinformation campaign actually start to fall apart? Well, in this story, it's not just one thing. It's two very different things happening at once: an official military takedown and a simple feature update on a social media app. Today, we're going to break down exactly how these two events supposedly exposed a pretty sophisticated operation. You really don't see this every day. A national military putting out an official statement that's just two words: fake news. But that's exactly what the source material here says happened. The French Navy called out a news story directly, and, this wasn't just a simple correction. This was the first major crack in what's been described as a pretty elaborate propaganda effort. All right, so here's how we're going to connect the dots. First, we'll look at the main accusation. Then, we're going to dive into the two big case studies our source points to: that French Navy incident and then this whole expose on X.com. And finally, we'll piece it all together to look at the anatomy of the alleged campaign.
So our story really kicks off with two events that, on the surface, look totally unrelated. You've got an official statement from a government on one side, and on the other, just a small tech update to a social media app. But our source claims these two things came together to shine a light on one single coordinated effort. So what is the big claim here? It's that a deliberate, coordinated disinformation campaign allegedly run from Pakistan with the goal of targeting India basically got unmasked, thanks to its own blunders and a little bit of new tech transparency.
Let's start with the first domino that fell, okay? This whole thing involves what looked like a really credible news report, a juicy quote from a foreign military officer, and then a very fast, very public takedown from the French military itself.
Okay, so here's how this story supposedly went down. Several media outlets in Pakistan started reporting this huge victory for their Air Force against India. And the proof? The key piece of evidence was a quote from a supposed French naval officer who apparently showered praise on Pakistan's incredible performance.
But the French Navy's response was, well, surgical. They just took the story apart piece by piece. First up, they correct the name. It wasn't Jex Loon, it was Yvonne Loon. Small detail, right? But then comes the big one. They stated, flat out, that Officer Loon never said anything like that. Ever. The whole quote, the entire basis for the story, was, in their words, fake. So you have to ask, why bother with all this? Well, the source suggests there's a pretty clear strategy at play. Step 1, you create a fake story and publish it in friendly local media. Step 2, you attribute it to a believable foreign source, to make it sound legit. Step 3, you get it trending on social media. And the final goal, you hope a big international news outlet picks it up. That's how you launder your fake story into the real global news cycle. Okay, so moving from old school media, let's jump over to the digital battlefield, because our source claims that a recent change on xi.com, what used to be Twitter, accidentally ripped the mask off a whole other part of this alleged campaign. Now, central to this part of the story are what the source is calling imposter accounts. And look, these aren't just your average anonymous trolls. These are profiles allegedly built from the ground up to deceive. We're talking fake names, fake flags, fake locations, all designed to hide where they're really from and push a very specific agenda. And this is where it all started to unravel. When X.com began showing where users were actually posting from, a funny thing happened. See, an account claiming to be in Washington, D.C. was suddenly revealed to be posting from South Asia. And a bunch of others that were using Indian flags to look like they were from India also suddenly revealed to be based in South Asia, which our source alleges is in this context just a stand-in for Pakistan. The source lays out some pretty sophisticated tactics here. These accounts would supposedly take on Indian names and use Indian flags. They'd pretend to be longtime followers to build up trust. Then they'd systematically inject a pro-Pakistan narrative into conversations. And get this, one of the cleverest tactics was to accuse real accounts of being fake. It's a kind of digital gaslighting, right? Designed to create chaos and make people doubt who's real. So we've looked at the two big case studies. Now let's pull back and look at the whole thing. According to the source, how does all of this fit together into one big, organized campaign? It seems to follow a pretty clear four-step playbook. First, you fabricate the story. Then, you publish it through media outlets that are on your side. Step 3, you amplify it using a whole network of social media accounts, just like the ones we saw. And finally, you go for the grand prize, getting a major international news organization to report on it, which makes it seem legitimate.
And yeah, this probably wasn't random. The source speculates that this was a highly structured operation, likely organized and coordinated inside private messaging groups on apps like Telegram. That's where you could pick your targets, sync up your messaging, and make sure you're having the biggest possible impact.
So where does that leave us? Well, the source concludes that just reacting to these things one by one isn't gonna cut it. It argues for a massive, global campaign to actively fight back against what it calls a sustained effort to spread misinformation and damage India's image on the world stage.
And all of this leaves us with a really important question to think about. In this new age of information warfare, where stories are weapons and social media is the battlefield, who is the real victim? Is it just the countries involved, or is it something bigger, like the very idea of truth itself?